Worship in spirit and truth. What does this look like exactly? Clearly, Jesus doesn't think it requires being in a certain location. In a single line, he completely bypasses a theological debate going back centuries between Samaritans and Jews about which place is the right place to worship. Even while Jesus says the Jews are right, he moves past the debate to make this point about spirit and truth, which kind of raises a question. If the location isn't what matters, if even the ancient Jerusalem temple, built according to God's own design, isn't the important thing for true worship, then why do we make so much fuss about this building? This church, large, historic, and beautiful though it is, can hardly compare to the temple. Why should we care so much about it? Because although the temple was eventually transcended, it did matter. Despite Jesus' prophecy, it was, after all, his own father who gave Moses meticulous commands about the construction of the tabernacle, and then guided David and Solomon to build that temple, successor to the tabernacle. Because though the most important quality of authentic worship is spirit and truth, this does not mean that we cease to be flesh and blood. Our flesh and blood is destined for eternity along with our souls. It's why Jesus rose from the dead to eat fish and bread to prove he had a body. It's why St. Paul preaches forcefully about the resurrection, why we list the resurrection every time we say the creed. It's why Ezekiel, when having a vision about the perfect future that God prepares for his people, is shown a temple that pours out water, that nourishes trees to provide food and medicine. For a human being to do something in truth, it involves their body. For a human being to act in spirit will affect their body. The temple is just a building. This church is just a building. But they reveal something more than just stone and wood and paint. They manifest order. They are evidence of the sacrifices of many human beings. They are testaments to the effect that God has had on the lives of people through generations. The simple truth is that without buildings like this, our awareness of God would be less clear, our worship less tangible. I have been to the remnants of the temple in Jerusalem. Even 1900 years after being destroyed, it still affects people deeply, in spirit, so to speak. This connection between physical and spiritual is so significant that when looking for a metaphor to describe what it means to belong to God, St. Peter reaches for a comparison to a church. He calls us to be living stones, built up into a spiritual house for God. So while Jesus does not expect every follower in the world to go to one specific building or mountain, he never says we should avoid buildings and mountains altogether. Our God is a God of history. As scandalous as it may seem, there is something special about specific times and places, ways they convey God's loving plan of salvation that other places cannot. The great gift that Jesus gives us then is not that he takes away the importance of certain locations, but that he empowers us to make places holy wherever we find ourselves. God chose the Jews. Salvation came from them. There's no getting around it. He's clear with the Samaritan woman. Once he arrived, however, he wondrously provided us a way to extend his presence to the whole world. But he doesn't override our human nature to do so. Your house is not the only house in the world, but it is your home. To force everyone out of their houses does not make home more accessible, but less. So this is not the only church in the world, not the only holy site in the world, not the only place to worship God in the world, but it is our church. It is our holy place, our place to worship in spirit and in truth. So this church is more sacred than other buildings because it houses the Eucharistic presence of Jesus, because it was consecrated by a successor to the apostles, because it is connected spiritually and organizationally to the cornerstone, chosen and precious, of Jesus Christ through the church he established. It is special. Being in this building will not make our worship truly spiritual if we come without faith. Yet, just as truly spiritual love is shown in the bodily action of one who loves, so this church is the body to the soul that is our worship. I urge you to continue to care for this church as for your own body. A temporary home, yes, but still destined to be remade into eternal dwelling. So rejoice with me to stand in this house of the Lord. May God grant that it never go